In this video, we will talk about Bhagavad-Gita as a science. Now, most people think that Bhagavad-Gita is a Hindu scripture, which basically preempts its characterization as a science. Factually, we don't talk about an American science, a European science, an African science, an Asian science, or an Australian science. Science is science. It is not sectarian. However, religions are highly sectarian. Therefore, putting Bhagavad Gita in the same bucket as sectarian religions by calling it a Hindu scripture preempts the possibility of Bhagavad Gita being a science. It just becomes a sectarian belief system rather than science. So in this video, we will talk about how Bhagavad Gita is science. Thereafter, we don't have to call it a Hindu scripture in any serious sense of the term. This video is structured into three main parts. In the first part, we will talk about the six main topics of Bhagavad Gita. In the second part, we will contrast these ideas of Bhagavad Gita with the modern scientific and widely prevalent ideas to show how Bhagavad Gita is radically different from all that most people have come to assume about these six main topics. In the third and final part, I will debunk the modern ideas and show how the Bhagavad Gita ideas are true. While there are many deep technical points to be discussed in each of these six topics, I have tried to keep them as simple as possible, even for a non-technical audience. But given the fact that this video is about the science of Bhagavad Gita, I cannot totally avoid discussing technicalities. Most people are used to think of Bhagavad Gita as religion and scripture, so scientific technicalities may surprise you. But that is the whole point of this video, namely, taking you out of religious and scriptural thinking into technical and scientific thinking. You may have to watch this video multiple times in order to fully grasp all the issues and fully understand all the technicalities. In his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada talks about the five main topics of Bhagavad Gita. He writes, and I quote, "The subject of the Bhagavad Gita entails the comprehension of five basic truths: the Īśvara, the Supreme Controller, and the Jīvas, the controlled living entities; Prakṛti, or material nature, and time, the duration of existence of the whole universe or the manifestation of the material nature; and karma, or activity, are also discussed." Unquote. Thus, Prabhupada identifies five key topics of Bhagavad Gita, namely Īśvara, Jīva, Prakṛti, Kāla, and karma. To this list of five, I would like to add a sixth topic, which is yoga. Yoga is extensively discussed in Bhagavad Gita, but not noted in Prabhupada's list. This addition is important because if we only discuss the five topics he notes, then Bhagavad Gita would be seen as a science of this world, but not describing transcendence from this world. We would also disregard the fact that many Bhagavad Gita chapters, even in Prabhupada's translation and commentary on Bhagavad Gita, are entitled as chapters on different kinds of yoga. And so, I will talk about Bhagavad Gita as a collection of six main subjects, which include Prabhupada's five subjects, namely Īśvara, Jīva, Prakṛti, Kāla, and Karma, and add yoga to this list. Each of these six Bhagavad Gita terms is currently translated into English. But the problem with that translation is that the Bhagavad Gita words don't mean the same as the Western or English words. For instance, we translate Īśvara as God, but these two are not the same. Likewise, we often translate Jīva as the soul, but they are quite different. Therefore, it is essential to keep using the Vedic terms to demarcate them from the Western connotations coming from translations. But insofar as everyone may not be familiar with these Vedic terms, we can sometimes also use the English words for convenience. We must bear in mind that if we use the English translations of the Vedic words, we don't mean to synonymize the Vedic words with the English words. These are just matters of convenience for an audience that may not be so familiar with the Vedic words and more familiar with the English words. This convenience must be used with caution. An easy example of convenience with caution is the use of the word president. Many countries have their presidents, but they don't have the same powers, roles, and duties. And yet, the word president means someone important in a nation. Calling two people presidents of some countries doesn't mean they have the same power, roles, and duties. And yet, in some loose sense, we can communicate the idea that we are talking about the head of a government. If we used different words for them, most people would not understand. If we synonymize the words, everyone will misunderstand. And therefore, we use these words for convenience, but with caution. Abusing that convenience creates misunderstanding, and rejecting that convenience hinders understanding. Let's begin by defining these six terms and topics. These are brief definitions right now, and we will go over the nuances of each of these words later in this video. We will also contrast them to the English words, such as the difference between Īśvara and God, or Jīva and the soul. But we need a simple definition to show that these six topics are highly interrelated and not independent subjects. We also cannot understand any topic fully without the other topics. Therefore, these topics are not like six separate balls in a bag which we could pick without the others. They are rather like links of a chain, such that picking up one link means picking up all the links. And yet, we can still talk about each individual link in a chain without delinking the chain into individual links. The general principle of many interrelated topics is called Bheda Bhed in the Vedic tradition. Bheda means there are many individual links, and Abheda means they are part of one chain. Let's begin with Prakṛti because it is the easiest topic to begin with. Prakṛti represents material nature. It also means something artificial. And so matter is an artificial thing. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean it is a reality. We can take the example of a toy house. A toy house exists and it is not a real house. This is why Prakriti is sometimes called mithya, just like a fictional movie, novel, or painting. It exists and it is a fiction. And yet, even the fiction is not meaningless and purposeless. It may tell a false story, but there is a meaningful story. It could happen like it is in the story, but it doesn't. These fictional stories are created for entertainment, so there is a purpose too. The quest for meaning and purpose in life originates in persons. So persons are the precondition for Prakriti. And yet these persons have meaning in them which they seek, such as a house, story, movie, painting, etc., which is why these things come into existence. And so Prakriti must have meaning and purpose because it comes into existence to fulfill the desire for meaning and purpose in a person. Even our body is a certain type of meaning and purpose. If we saw no meaning and purpose in the body, we would not mind dying. The mere fact that almost everyone is averse to death means that they see great meaning and purpose in their body and in the world around them. Even those who want to die wish so after they have lost the sense of meaning and purpose in their existence. They can be dissuaded from suicide if they begin to see meaning and purpose in life again. Therefore, meaning and purpose are the essence of Prakrti. This meaning expands to create a specific embodiment of meaning, such as a house. The house doesn't originate in a substance, it originates in a mind as an idea with an architectural style and a functional purpose. The study of Prakrti is about how this meaning and purpose in a person are gradually concretized over many steps to produce an embodiment of that specific meaning and purpose. That concretization of meaning includes various kinds of living bodies. The next topic is Jīva. Jīva simply means a living person. There is a difference between Atma and Jīva. Atma means the I or the self, and Jīva means a living self or I am something. The Atma exists even during sleep, but the Jīva is gone because during sleep we don't have a sense of what we are. In the Vedic tradition, the sleeping state is considered superior to the waking and dreaming states because during waking or dreaming, the body is not the real identity of the Jiva. And yet, the Jiva identifies with the body and thinks that the body is its real identity. So, for example, if you ask someone about who they are, they might say things like, I am Hindu, Indian, Tamil, and so on. They are all talking about the body and not the self. In fact, when this bodily identification grows too much, people fight with each other based on this bodily identity. And yet, all this identification with the body disappears during deep sleep. So, that is called the superior state to the waking and dreaming state in the yoga tradition. The implicit reason for that superiority of the sleeping state is that it is better to have no identity than to have a false identity. Of course, we don't just stop simply at denying the false identity of the body during sleep. We also go beyond that false identity to the true identity of the self. So there is a transcendent state beyond the sleeping state. When someone reaches that transcendent state, they never sleep, even though the body sleeps. So that state is called Yoga Nidra. In this state, the body is in Nidra or sleep, but the self is absorbed in itself and is thus called a yogi, because of which he doesn't have any sense of living in a body. That pure self, separated from the bodily identity, is called the Atma. But when there is a bodily identity, the same self is called Jiva. When the pure self transcends into a spiritual body, again the Atma and the Jiva become identical and there is no need for their separation. Therefore, Jiva in the current context means I am these living bodies created by Prakrti, and Atma means something beyond these varied bodies. Since there is also an eternal spiritual body, therefore, Jiva and Atma are also used interchangeably for the spiritual realm. Due to these two kinds of meanings, Jiva and Atma are sometimes used interchangeably and sometimes distinguished. Note how we cannot talk about Prakrti without a person, and then how that person lives in a material body without Prakrti. So these are interdependent topics, not mutually separable. The next topic is Īśvara. A toy house exists only if someone thought of the toy house before creating it and then had the purpose of creating it. A meaningless and purposeless world can exist without any creator, but a meaningful and purposeful world cannot exist without someone having the meaning in them before creating and then converting that meaning into their creation because of their purpose to create it. And so Īśvara is the creator of the world. All things in Prakrti are meaningful and purposeful, and all this meaning and purpose was originally within Īśvara, which means Even Prakrti was within Īśvara earlier. But when this meaning and purpose were expressed as toy houses, then Prakrti was externalized. This externalization of Prakrti is called the dream of the Īśvara. It is a dream because Prakrti is a toy house, not a real house. And it was earlier in Īśvara and then manifest from the Īśvara, just like ideas hidden in our minds become our dreams. So this entire cosmos was earlier inside Īśvara and then it came out of the Īśvara as a dream. The Īśvara is also present in the dream, just like we see ourselves in our dreams. So there is a creator Īśvara and then there is a created Īśvara. They are one and different at the same time, just like our dreamt persona is different from the dreaming person, and yet the dreamt persona is also one of the dreamer's personality. Now the question is, how does the Jiva know that it is dreaming and not in reality? The answer is that there is some incompatibility between the dreamer and the dream. For example, if we have a pleasant dream, we never wake up. We wake up if the dream shows something shocking, surprising, unexpected, or painful. Even painful dreams are created from the dreamer, but the dreamer may be unaware of that pain already existing in them. So when the dream is painful, the dreamer wakes up due to the incompatibility between the dream and the dreamer. Likewise, each person has some idea of what is expected, normal, or usual. But when the unexpected, abnormal, or unusual is seen during a dream, the dreamer is shocked and he wakes up. This is called awakening or enlightenment. It is just like waking up from a dream. The dreamer realizes that the dreamt personality he was identifying with isn't truly him, and those things that he saw in the dream weren't really about him. So now the question comes, why does a person have pleasant or painful dreams? The answer is karma, or the unconscious record of their pleasant and painful activities done in the past. The ultimate purpose of karma is awakening, but during the dream, a person does various things, and that record of those activities changes the subsequent dreams. For seeing pleasant dreams, one has to do pleasant activities, and unpleasant activities cause unpleasant dreams. Therefore, everyone reaps what they have sown, and their dreams are sourced from within them. Now the question is, what will always cause pleasant dreams? The answer is pleasant activities. Then the question is, what is pleasant activity? The answer is that which is fully compatible with our own nature. For example, nobody wants to be lied to, face injustice, or undergo suffering. But we might often lie to others, bring injustice on them, and cause them suffering. So lying, injustice, and suffering are unpleasant by each person's own definition of pleasantness for themselves. The record of these pleasant or unpleasant activities is called karma, and every record is inverted such that whatever good or bad we have done to others is subsequently done to us. Of course, if we did to others what we were prepared to accept on ourselves, then there would be no lies, injustice, or suffering. So there is good karma in which we do to others what we can accept being done to us. And then there is bad karma in which we do to others what we cannot accept being done to us. Beyond good and bad karma is a state in which we do good for others even if they do bad for us. Or we just do our duty whether or not someone else does their duty. So these kinds of activities liberate the Atma from the material world, and they are called akarma. But if we keep these dutiful and transcending activities aside, Then there is good and bad karma. Of these, bad karma is created by a double standard in which a person does bad things to others which he cannot endure on himself. But everything he has done to others is eventually done to him. Renouncing these double standards is the preliminary stage of moral life. It means renouncing the fictitious idea of truth for me and lies for others, justice for me and injustice for others, or happiness for me and misery for others. These self-other incompatibilities exist in oneself, and correcting them is the process of karma. Since karma leads to correction, therefore, karma is epistemology, or how we attain inner harmony and self-consistency. Without karma, we would live in double standards, which means we would expect one thing for ourselves, but we would give something else to others. But with karma, you would come to a single standard for everyone, which is truth, justice, and happiness. This inner harmony is called the Brahman realization, which means I can treat others just as I want to be treated myself. Brahman realization is not factual oneness of all the Jīva or Atma. It is the ability to see that everyone is just like me. So everyone needs to be treated in the same way as I need to be treated. Some people converted this absence of double standard for me and others to the oneness of all Atma, which is a totally anti-Vedic ideology and has no support in the Vedic tradition. So, what determines the precise sequence of dreamlike experiences? What decides whether the next dream will be pleasant or painful, shocking or normal, expected or unexpected? The answer is Kāla or time. Even as the record of past actions and beliefs is stored within us, they don't come out all at once. They come out one by one, and the sequence of emergence is determined by time. Kāla is sometimes called causal time because it reveals the hidden and converts the unmanifest into the manifest. The records of past actions and beliefs are hidden in us, and causal time reveals them as our dreams. So, our dreams are the manifest reality, and the unconscious records are the unmanifest reality. The sequencing of dreams requires a coordination across many dreamers to create the illusion that we are awake rather than dreaming. As we all know, if we dream, nobody else has the same dream. So if the world is dreaming, how can others have the same experiences that correspond to our dreams? The answer is that if multiple dreams are coordinated with each other, then we can be in a dream and yet it can appear to us that we are awake. To understand this dream coordination, imagine a puppeteer orchestrating many puppets at once. The actions of each puppet are correlated and coordinated with those of the other puppets, but they are not caused by any of the puppets to the other puppets. For example, if one puppet throws a punch and the other puppet retracts, it seems that one puppet punched the other puppet, because of which it retracted, when in fact both puppets are behaving in a synchronized manner because they are separately controlled by the puppeteer. In technical terms, we can say that the puppet action is correlation rather than causation. It means that nobody can throw a punch or get punched unless the puppeteer coordinates both puppets. Each puppet is orchestrated individually, and that individual coordination in case of the dreaming Atma is based on its past actions and beliefs. So even if it is punched, it is not due to the other puppet, but due to its own past actions and beliefs. And so, Kāla or time, which coordinates multiple individual puppets, is also called Pashupati. Pashu means animal, and it is like a puppet, while Pati means the master and it is like the puppeteer. The Jiva in the material world is the puppet in the hands of the puppeteer. Each of us think that we are doing this or that, but in fact the puppeteer is doing everything. So one might ask, if Pashupati is doing everything, then why are we responsible for our actions called karma? The answer is that our responsibility for our actions is due to our approval for those actions. If we don't approve, then Pashupati doesn't force us. So the puppet is not devoid of free will, but its will is approval and disapproval rather than acting or other things. Approval comes when we identify with the body, and disapproval comes when we dissociate from the body. For example, if we have a bad thought and we immediately dissociate ourselves from that thought, then the thought disappears. But if we keep associating with the thought, then the thought gradually develops into action. So the Atma has free will of association or dissociation, and yet the thoughts and actions are still done by Pashupati. This is understood better if we think of the puppet as the Pashu or animal being dragged by the animal's master, although the animal can resist that dragging. If the animal resists, then the master doesn't drag. But if the animal complies, then the master keeps dragging. Most of the time, most of us are simply dragged by time. Only the awakened ones want to stop this dragging. And so this dragging is not deterministic, and there is no contradiction between determinism and free will. We are dragged by time simply because we approve this dragging by identification with the body. So if the body says, I want this, then we approve and say, yes, of course, I want it. That is because we equate the body's wants with our wants through identification with the body. If we stop that identification, then the body may say, I want this. But the Atma disapproves and says, that is just the body putting demands on me, but they are not really my demands. The final topic is yoga. It comes from the Sanskrit root yuj, which means to join. Yoga is about joining everything to its source in Īśvara, because everything was expanded from Īśvara for his pleasure. Of course, in the material realm, the Atma doesn't recognize that it was expanded from Īśvara for his pleasure. Rather, the Atma thinks that its life is meant for its own pleasure, which is called individualism, or every man for himself. This selfishness creates various kinds of double standards, which means high demand for myself and low supply for others, or the expectation that I will do a few good things for a short while right now, and in return I must be given eternal enjoyment in heaven. These double standards produce karma, which cause the living entity to become a puppet of Kāla. The living entity now struggles against the constraints imposed on it by Kāla and karma, and that is called the struggle for existence. Yoga is how we put an end to the struggle for existence by going to the root of the problem, namely individualism. When all things are done for the pleasure of Īśvara and nothing that displeases Īśvara is done, then it is called yoga. Most people today think that yoga is exercises. In fact, they do these exercises thinking it will make their body strong, after which they will enjoy their life even more. Their innate idea of life is that everything exists for their pleasure. While it is true that exercises make the body healthy, if that health is not used for the pleasure of Īśvara, then it is karma rather than yoga. So the difference between karma and yoga is that in karma one works for himself and in yoga one works for Īśvara. All those doing exercises for a healthy body to enjoy life are doing karma and not yoga. Yoga is also called yajna, which means worship, praise, or sacrifice. All things produced from Īśvara are offered back to Īśvara for his pleasure, and that is called yajna. Yoga or yajna come in many forms, which become various paths to serving the Īśvara. For instance, we can do Jnana Yoga, which means learning and teaching about Īśvara. Then we can absorb our mind in thoughts of Īśvara, which is called Dhyana Yoga. Similarly, we can serve Īśvara by doing our duties according to time, place, role, ability, opportunity, and proclivity, and that is called Karma Yoga. Then we can worship Īśvara in the form of a deity or chant mantras or perform yajna with love and devotion, and that is called Bhakti Yoga. Likewise, we can work to protect those who worship Īśvara and destroy those who attack these worshippers, and that is taking on the mood of Īśvara and acting like him. And by the adoption of the mood of Īśvara, we become one with him in mood. In this way, there are many forms of yoga, and people looking at this diversity become often confused if they do not know that yoga means joining everything with the source of everything. All these topics from Bhagavad-Gita have become very hard to understand at the present time because of the propagation of anti-Vedic ideologies. All these anti-Vedic ideologies are forms of ayoga, which means individualism or doing everything for oneself. This individualism comes in three main forms at present. First, it comes from monotheistic religions in which God is separate from the soul and each soul is separate from the other souls. Monotheistic religions don't have a conception of whole and part. So by following monotheism, each soul thinks of himself as separate from the other souls and God because they are all separated in theology. The second main source of individualism is gross materialism, which doesn't even accept a God or soul, so there isn't even a common creator or ancestor. Rather, life comes out of a chemical soup and ends at the time of death. While it exists, life has no purpose other than pleasure. So this idea of life as pleasure makes us highly individualistic. The third main source of individualism is impersonalism, that accepts that some soul or spirit exists in each person or body, but doesn't see any supreme soul or spirit beyond oneself. Again, each individual spirit tries for individual liberation from the material world and sees social duties as a burden, bondage, or slavery. The attempt to attain liberation entails the renunciation of social duties, and it again makes a person highly individualistic. In this case, the person's aspirations for liberation entail the renunciation of their duties towards this family, society, and so on. These are the three main contributors to individualism. But for the sake of completeness, we can add a fourth category, which is not intellectually justified individualism, but simply a fact of life for nearly all people struggling to survive in today's world. Their lives are so hard that they can't think beyond the current life. The Bhagavad Gita calls these four classes of people Asuras, Naradhama, Maya Aparitajnana, and Mudhas. All these four classes of people reject yoga, which means dedicating their lives to Īśvara. Due to the innate idea of separation in each one of them, they cannot see nature as interconnected and interdependent things. Due to their extreme preoccupation with the body, They cannot see how the Atma is separate from the body. Each individualist thinks of himself as the center of the world rather than putting God at the center. So even if he talks about God, he treats God as his servant, provider, and supplier. Thereby, he can never develop any genuine understanding of Īśvara. Every individualist suffers from double standards because he expects a lot and gives back little. He does all things that are immoral either through neglect of duty or because he believes that once he dies he won't have to deal with the consequences of his actions, or because he thinks his sins will be forgiven, or because he is so fearful of his own life that he doesn't think about right or wrong. All individualists are highly arrogant and they believe that they are masters of the world. So it is impossible for them to accept that they are just puppets in the hand of Kāla, being dragged through life like an animal by its master. Finally, the individualist never thinks about serving and pleasing Īśvara. In fact, he feels offended if we ask him to serve because his entire existence is based on selfishness. So we cannot expect any kind of selfless devotion, and therefore we cannot expect any yoga. So the central problem of individualism destroys the understanding of all the six topics of Bhagavad Gita. Individualists always prefer monotheism, materialism, impersonalism, and survivalism, and their minds are mostly incapable of understanding other than this. So in this part of the video, I will contrast the ideas of Bhagavad Gita with their modern counterparts to clearly distinguish the two and show that they are inversions of the Vedic ideas. After this, in the next part of the video, I will rationally and empirically prove how the modern ideas are false. It is important to demarcate Vedic ideas from the modern counterparts before falsifying the modern ideas. Because if we don't demarcate before falsifying, then it seems we have falsified the Vedic ideas as well. So in this part of the video, we will try to demarcate the Vedic ideas from the modern ideas, and in the next part, we will refute modern ideas and prove the Vedic ideas. There are many easy examples of how the Vedic ideas differ from the modern ideas. For example, modern science claims that nature is meaningless and purposeless. Monotheistic religions claim that the soul is simply breath in the body and never separate from it. Monotheistic religions claim that divine truth cannot be known by human epistemology and it has to be accepted on blind faith. They claim to have received some divine revelation from God which nobody else can receive. They treat the present world as a reality rather than a dream. So the ideas of awakening to realize one's separation from the world become impossible. Their ideas of God are also wrathful, vengeful, and hateful, which makes them hate other people based on gender, race, nationality, culture, civilization, language, food, dress, and endless such things. They don't see life as eternally joyful activity in the service for the Supreme. Instead, they see current life as harsh punishment and heavenly life as carefree enjoyment. So they bring punishment on others and seek personal enjoyment. Then there are those who reject all deities and claim that the universe has no origin or source. They create false ideas of linear time, empirically contradicted by historical evidence. Sometimes they even accept cycles of time with no capacity to explain why history goes in cycles, because they already rejected a deity creating and destroying the world cyclically. Factually, the world could go linearly, cyclically, or randomly. To those who reject a creator, there is no way to explain why one of those is true. Bhagavad Gita is very easy to understand if our mind is not contaminated by perverse ideas propagated by modern Western monotheistic, impersonalistic, and selfish ideologies. We can prove everything by reason and experience. So, Bhagavad Gita is truth and science. But because of the prevalence of perverse ideas, our minds are highly contaminated with false ideologies. None of these perverse ideas can be proven by reason or experience, so they are not truth or science. And yet, due to their popularity and proliferation, everyone is prone to think that ideas from ancient texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita, were created by primitive people, so they could not be truth and science. Meanwhile, they also think that modernity has created truth and science. So its perverse ideas must be either the sole truth or a much better truth than any of the ancient texts. So let's spend some time now contrasting each of the six Bhagavad Gita ideas with their modern counterparts. I will hopefully succeed in showing how modern ideologies invert Bhagavad Gita thinking. That inversion of meaning of similar sounding words means that they can never be synonymized. Let's begin by contrasting Prakrti with the modern idea of matter. Prakrti comprises qualities, while modern science conceptualizes matter as quantities. Modern science claims that qualities are simply illusions created by our senses and the mind, while Bhagavad Gita states that these qualities are the actual nature of reality. Factually, modern science has never been able to prove how these so-called mental and perceptual illusions are created because it removed the senses and the mind from science at the outset. Similarly, modern science has never been able to prove that nature is quantities, but it made that assumption by separating itself from religion, which is called the mind-body separation or the science-religion divide. The separation was political intrigue done by scientists to create an authority structure separate from the religious authority structure, not something proven by reason or experience. The Bhagavad Gita has no mind body or science religion divide, unlike the monotheistic scriptures. Therefore, Prakrti is discussed as much as the other topics like Kāla, Karma, Īśvara, Jīva, and Yoga. These separations are simply results of the monotheistic political intrigue. Due to the quantification of reality, modern science imagines that reality must be reducible to separate parts, which is called reductionism. It means that we should be able to measure every small particle in isolation from the other particles. Or we can measure each property of a particle independent of the other properties. In contrast, quality thinking rejects reductionism. While everything can be measured individually, what we get from measurement is the collective effect of many other things and properties on the measured thing or property. And thus, each individual thing is like a part of an organism. Separated from the whole organism, each part is different than what it is when attached to the organism. If we follow reductionism, then we are chopping the organism into individual pieces and thus killing the organism and all its parts. The parts of a dead organism are not the same as parts of a living organism. Therefore, nothing produced by reductionism is true. Quantity thinking goes further to claim that the entire universe is uniform. So the laws discovered on Earth must apply to every part of the universe. This is a side effect of reductionism and quantification, and it arises due to the hypothesis that nature is mathematical. Mathematics is universal truth, and so the same mathematical laws must apply to everything in the universe. And thus, all discoveries made by humans on Earth must be true for everything else in the universe. In contrast, Quality thinking says that every part of the universe is unique as a different part of an organism. The entire universe is an organism, and the earth is simply one part of that organism. So, claims about one part of the organism cannot be true for every other part of the organism. The application of quantity thinking to the entire universe is like equating the head of the organism to its belly, and under organism thinking, no such theory can ever be true. At best, such theories will be a coarse approximation in which we say that the head and the belly both comprise cells. But in reality, those cells will be as different as neural cells versus intestinal cells. And so, in the beginning of quantity science, we seem to make great progress because we are saying that both brain and stomach comprise cells. But as we progress, we find that these two are completely different kinds of cells. And any attempt to force a common understanding of these cells produces infinite contradictions with facts. In contrast, if we try to understand reality as qualities, then we seek the origin of all qualities, which are called sattva, rajas, and tamas. These qualities mix to construct a body, and each part of the body predominates in different qualities and their combinations, which makes every part unique. And yet, because there is a common understanding of qualities, therefore there is a universal science. And thus we get both universality and uniqueness. Because we rejected reductionism, quantification, and mathematization of reality at the outset. In contrast, the reductionist, quantified, and mathematical view of reality is always falsified in the quality reality. The quality-based science doesn't require mind-body or science-religion separation because body, mind, and spirit are all qualities. We don't need a religion based on blind faith because qualities are rational and empirical. We don't need to build a knowledge system based on political intrigue for establishing power structures because reason and experience give us the truth. One of the fundamental differences between quality and quantity is that qualities can be dormant or active, while quantities are always activated. For example, someone can have the quality of anger, but it doesn't mean that he is always angry. Or wood has the potentiality for fire, but it doesn't mean it is always burning. In simple words, qualities become dormant or active, which is called avyakta and vyakta in the Vedic tradition. Avyakta or unmanifest is the dormant state of quality, and vyakta or manifest is the active state of quality. Now the question is, what causes the dormant to become active or vice versa? What makes a person with the quality of anger sometimes angry and otherwise peaceful? What causes wood to sometimes burn into ashes when it was previously wood? The answer is Kāla or time. Kāla sometimes activates a potential quality and sometimes sends the activated quality back to the potential state. So reality is hidden and revealed as an effect of time. For example, we might meet a person and find that they are very nice to us. Then, as we spend more time with them, we find that they are often very envious and hateful towards us. That is because the same person has the quality for being nice and being envious. But as time passes, the envious potential is revealed and the niceness potential is hidden, or vice versa. This potential based thinking is very easy to understand if we personalize reality because each person has many potentials which are occasionally activated. However, modern science depersonalized reality into objects which are always supposed to be active and never potentials. And so everyone is supposed to be always able to know an object using the same procedure when in the case of persons, we could easily accept that each person may be seen to be different at different times, places, and situations by different knowers of that person. When reality is depersonalized, then time loses its causal role and becomes an impersonal dimension in modern science. Change now occurs due to active properties exerting force in modern science. Thus, there is a fundamental difference between Vedic and modern science thinking on causality. In the Vedic thinking, Kāla or time is the cause, and in modern science thinking, material properties are the cause. In the Vedic thinking, time is the force, the controller, and the cause of change, while in modern science thinking, material properties create force, cause, and change. The modern science thinking works fine if reality is always active, and modern science stops working when reality is potentials. If reality is potentials, then all force-based causal theories are false. Srila Prabhupada once said in a conversation that the gravitational force is actually Lord Sankarshana, who incarnates as Kala or time. Not many people understand how that can be true. The answer is that Sankarshana moves the cosmos by his will as time. Therefore, the apple doesn't fall to the earth because of a gravitational force. Rather, Sankarshana makes the apple fall. But other things in the universe don't fall like the apple on the earth. This fact has been proven by cosmological aberrations on galaxy rotations, which disprove the universality of gravitational force. So the basic problem with postulating that reality is active properties is that they must always work the same everywhere. But in case of potentials, they can work differently in different places, times, and situations, depending on whether the potential has been activated more or less. If reality is potentials, then the assumed universality of scientific laws is completely false. In fact, those who get the blessings of Lord Sankarsana can carry mountains on their fingertips because there is actually no such thing as a mountain's weight unless it is activated from a potential state by Kala or time. In fact, the activation of dormant potentials creates room for infinite so-called miracles without violating any scientific principle because nature is moving due to will rather than mechanical force. Christianity created a theology called deism, in which the world is moving according to mathematical laws and not God's will, to justify modern science. But the Vedic tradition never accepted deism. In fact, critics of Christianity during colonial times, such as Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, said that if the world could be run by mathematical laws, then it could also be created by mathematical laws, which is what Big Bang is. So no God was required to create or govern the world, and Christianity became totally redundant when it created deism. Of course, no Christian ever responded to such critics, but it shows the fundamental tension between God and science. Namely, mathematics gradually replaces God, which is actually called Spinoza's God. And Einstein once said that he believes in God, but not the God of Judeo Christianity, but Spinoza's God. What he meant was that there is no God other than mathematics, which atheists also call mathematical Platonism. And so, while it is true that modern science came out of monotheistic religions through political intrigue, it is also true that monotheism created scientific atheism. For example, science destroyed the possibility of all miracles. So the Bible, which talks about the miracles of Jesus, must be false, and Jesus could not be God, and his crucifixion could not lead to any salvation. The mere fact that Christianity exists side by side with modern science is simply hypocrisy, because the very existence of science is the denial of God, His creation, and the possibility of miracles. To solve such fundamental problems, we have to change the idea of causality from causation by material properties to causation by Kāla or time. Now, there is no denial of God, creation, or miracles, but it is a completely different science because the very idea of causality and order in nature has been changed. That, of course, also changes the idea of time itself. Kala is not the same as what people call time today because Kala activates the potentials and deactivates the active potentials. To reveal and hide and change is revealing and hiding. Kala is the cause of change when time is an effect of change caused by application of force. This force-based activity is always linear, which means that the past never repeats in the future. But Kala-based activity is always cyclical because there is a person who activates and deactivates the same potential, like a person going through a routine of life. A person sleeps and awakes, but mathematics never sleeps or awakes. Due to the depersonalization of causality, history became linear progress for the depersonalized thinking, while history remains cyclical for personalized thinking. Under this depersonalized thinking, religions create the belief that the past was worse and the future will be better, and whatever progress has been made so far will never be reversed. But under personalized thinking, we accept that all the progress in the past will eventually be wiped out, and in the distant future, it will be recreated. Under depersonalized thinking, there is a great optimism about the future. But under personalized thinking, there is great pessimism. This pessimism about the future is what prompts the followers of the Vedic tradition to seek transcendence from this world. Now, most people would say that optimism is better than pessimism. But remember that they are operating on depersonalization of reality. By that depersonalization, they make everything worse than it would be otherwise. Because every person is treated as an object, and that objectified person retaliates against those who depersonalized him, which creates war, conflict, and destruction, which is actually the antithesis of progress. So, in theory, depersonalization creates optimism, but in practice, it is worse than pessimism. The Vedic pessimist doesn't depersonalize reality. He says that everything is a person and his attitude is reciprocated, and the result is far greater peace and harmony and far less war, conflict, and destruction compared to those who depersonalize. The pessimism is simply about the fact that this peace and harmony is not eternal or uniform, and due to the selfish individuals in this world who always objectify others, this peace and harmony would eventually be lost. So, even while living in peace and harmony, the pessimistic person tries to get out of the material world into eternal peace and harmony. Meanwhile, the so called optimistic person claims that the future will be better, but he destroys everything with his depersonalizing attitudes and makes the future even worse than the pessimist. Once everything has been destroyed, people begin seeking the truth again because their erstwhile ideas of progress have been empirically refuted. At this juncture, if they accept the Vedic truth, then they get peace and harmony. And yet, they don't become complacent because the cyclical worldview is pessimistic. So everyone tries to enter into eternal peace and harmony. This is a fundamental difference between the Vedic tradition and monotheistic religions, which claim that one day the world will become perfect, everyone will accept their religion, that there will be end of war and strife, a single ruler will come to reign over the whole world, and this reign of peace and comfort will exist for 1,000 years. But in the Vedic tradition, we can easily foretell that due to their selfish and depersonalizing attitude, there will never be peace and harmony. And their attempt to bring that peace and harmony will actually bring war and strife. And all that they claim to have achieved in the past will be destroyed in this war and strife to put them back to the proverbial Stone Age. If they want peace and harmony, they have to accept personalization because then they can live with honor and respect while remaining aware that this peace and harmony will not last forever. So, the permanent solution is to enter a different kind of world. There is a fundamental difference between Jiva and soul, which is that the Jiva acquires different material bodies, so the Jiva is never identical to the body. However, the soul never acquires a different body, so the soul is identical to the body. Monotheistic religions reject rebirth and the acquisition of new bodies, so for them, the soul and body are always the same thing. Thus, the monotheistic religions always equate the spiritual benefits of the soul to the material benefits of the body. For example, fighting with others for land is spiritual activity for them, and those who die in such wars are said to immediately enter eternal heaven. But in the Bhagavad-Gita, the Jiva and the body are different, and yet the Jiva acquires successive bodies based on its past actions and mentality. Therefore, those who fight with others for land become animals, such as dogs, which demarcate their domain of control by urinating on the land and then fighting with other dogs if they infringe their territory. Of course, even humans have to defend themselves from dogs by erecting fences. So even humans, if attacked by dogs, have to act like dogs. But this dog-like activity doesn't make a human a dog if he understands that he is separate from the body and his eternal spiritual benefit is different from the temporary defense of his territory for survival. The human defending himself against dogs erects his fences and then goes back to spiritual realization, while the dogs keep trying to breach the fences and keep barking if they can't breach. Animals cannot distinguish between body and soul. Animals have no conception of eternal spiritual identity separate from the temporary material identity. So, if some human also cannot distinguish between body and soul, then he is almost an animal. It doesn't matter if he writes a big book and calls that divine revelation. If he cannot understand that he is distinct from the body, then he is an animal. As the saying goes, what walks like a duck and quacks like a duck must be a duck. Similarly, one who behaves and thinks like an animal is an animal. The philosophy, religion, or science of an animal doesn't elevate him to a human level because that philosophy, religion, or science simply propagates the animal ideology of identity of the spiritual and material or body and soul. All these philosophies, religions, and sciences are basically materialism, which means there is nothing separate from the body. So life is lived for struggle, for body survival and pleasure. The Vedic tradition defines Īśvara as the complete truth, the greatest virtue, and the perfect bliss. All of us want to know the truth, receive virtue, and find bliss. And nobody wants to be told lies, endure vices, or suffer unhappiness. Therefore, the greater the truth, virtue, and bliss, the more desirable it is. By implication, the complete truth, virtue, and bliss is the most desirable for each individual. Since Ishvara is the complete truth, greatest virtue, and perfect bliss, therefore, Ishvara is the most desirable for everyone. In fact, Īśvara is the possibility of knowing the complete truth, receiving the most virtue, and finding the greatest bliss. And if that possibility is denied, then life would be lived enduring lies, vices, and unhappiness and become unbearable. Then death would be far more preferable compared to life. And so Īśvara is very natural for everyone to accept, and anyone who doesn't accept Īśvara is denying the possibility of truth, virtue, and bliss. And after that rejection, their own life becomes deceit, vices, and misery. We don't have to prove the existence of Īśvara because everyone wants exactly that. The intelligent thing is to accept that Īśvara exists, and the foolish thing is to reject him. Therefore, all those who reject Īśvara based on some alternate belief system are considered self-destructive idiots in the Vedic tradition. The Vedic tradition doesn't aggressively proselytize or convert other people because it is already secure in the knowledge that anyone who rejects Īśvara will be lost in deceit, vices, and misery, ending in their self-destruction. The Vedic tradition only teaches its followers to defend themselves against those who reject Īśvara in their own self-interest. Because if they convert to an ideology that rejects Īśvara, they too will be lost in deceit, vices, and misery. Meanwhile, those who have rejected Īśvara and are already lost in deceit, vices, and misery try to bring the followers of Īśvara down to their level through aggressive proselytization and conversion. They can't stand anyone else who is truthful, virtuous, or blissful and try to degrade them to their own level. This degrading replacement of Īśvara is called God. The eternal truth is replaced by whimsical contracts, endless hypocrisy, and numerous contradictions. Virtuosity is replaced by endorsement of vices as the inalienable sinfulness of humanity due to their ancestral inheritance of sin. And miserable existence is countered by the pursuit of hedonism, which leads to endless wars, poverty, and misery. Thus, the hallmark of those who follow God instead of Īśvara is that they are involved in progressive deceit, vices, and misery, which ends in their self-destruction. The Bhagavad Purana therefore says, Nate viduhu swartha gatim hi Vishnu, which means they don't know that their self-interest is Vishnu. By disregarding Vishnu, they reject their self-interest and become self-destructive. Therefore, Īśvara can never be equated to God because the former leads to truth, virtue, and bliss, and the latter leads to lies, vices, and misery. We don't have to simply believe this distinction because we can rationally and empirically prove that this is true. All those who deny this empirical and rational evidence are living in self-delusion, which leads to their self-destruction. We have discussed how karma is epistemology earlier, and we can repeat that here. When someone endures lies, vices, and misery for a long time, he gradually comes to truth, virtue, and bliss. Lies, vices, and misery are self-negating, while truth, virtue, and bliss are self-affirming. That is because the innate nature of the Atma is truth, virtue, and bliss, same as the innate nature of Īśvara. The difference is simply that the Atma is partial truth, virtue, and bliss, while Īśvara is complete truth, virtue, and bliss. When the Atma deviates from its own nature, which is truth, virtue, and bliss, then it enters a world commensurate with its deviation. If that deviation is closer to the nature of Īśvara, then the karma is enjoyed, and if that deviation is farther from the nature of Īśvara, then that karma is suffered. That is because the innate nature of the self is same as the innate nature of Īśvara. So by deviating from Īśvara's nature, the Atma goes against its own nature. The purpose of karma is to educate us about the deviation and then bring us to our innate nature and that of the Īśvara. And so, karma ends when we are situated in our innate nature. In contrast, faith has no epistemology. There is no way to know the difference between truth and lies, virtue and vices, and they often invert their definitions. All faith-based ideologies that reject the karma epistemology hope that they will find eternal bliss, but due to their deviation from truth and virtue, they end up with immeasurable misery. Therefore, faith-based ideologies are delusions. They promise bliss and deliver misery. People following these faith-based ideologies hope that they will enter heaven through deceit and immorality, and they actually enter animal or hellish life. Of course, it takes time to realize this because, as we have discussed, time acts on the potentials created in the past, and creation of this potentiality takes time. Enough bad deeds have to accumulate to take a person to a sufficiently long-lasting life of misery. Due to the time taken in the creation of potentiality and the time after which this potentiality is activated, there is a delay between cause and effect. There would be no such delay if everything was actuality, but delay exists when potentiality is created and activated. This delay between creation of potentiality and its activation allows faith-based ideologies to spread delusions. People are told that they will enter heaven through deceit and immorality, and they eventually enter animal or hellish life. Therefore, any ideology that rejects karma and endorses faith is one that rejects education and advances delusion. Faith is basically the rejection of epistemology, because if epistemology was accepted, then faith would be unnecessary. So faith comes after the rejection of epistemology, and through that rejection, delusion is advanced. Again, you don't have to trust this claim simply by my assertion. We can prove rationally and empirically that the most faith-affirming people are also the most dogmatic, fundamentalist, uneducated, and irrational people. They believe the most in the lies and are least capable of accepting factual evidence that contradicts their beliefs. In fact, they believe that doubts and questions are signs of their lack of faith. A frequent refrain from such people is that they are nobody to question the scripture. They scuttle all questions, ostracize those who express doubts, and rejoice in the company of equally dogmatic believers. In contrast, those who accept karma also accept that they have choice and then the responsibility to use that choice correctly. They ask questions, express doubts, and seek to be educated. Through this empirical and rational evidence, we can know that the karma-based thinking encourages inquiry and education, while faith-based thinking castigates inquiry and education as doctrinal heresy. Basically, faith-based thinking closes the mind and dulls the intellect, while karma-based thinking opens the mind and sharpens the intellect. All faith-based ideologies herd people like sheep, hoping to be shown a path by a shepherd. They don't question whether the shepherd is taking them on the right path. They entrust their blind faith in the shepherd, which makes it very easy to manipulate and control them. Each sheep simply looks at the other sheep and follows them blindly because they have lost the capacity to doubt, inquire, question, and learn. Yoga is rooted in the understanding of whole and part persons. Īśvara is the whole person, which means the complete truth, the greatest virtue, and perfect bliss. Meanwhile, the Atma is a partial person, which means a partial truth, partial virtue, and partial bliss. The Atma comes to the material world because of its envy of the whole person. The Atma asks, why can't I be the complete truth, the greatest virtue, and the complete bliss? It doesn't realize that if we were the whole truth, then we should be able to create infinite universes, but we can't. If we were the greatest virtue, then we must take responsibility for everyone in every universe, which we can't. If we were the perfect bliss, then we should be able to make everyone in every universe blissful, which we can't. So, one Atma desiring to be like Īśvara is simply an envious mindset without the capacity to attain anything remotely close to what it entails. It is just like someone changing their name to king to believe that they are king. All this wishful thinking, devoid of the capacity to fulfill it, is called a delusion in the Vedic tradition. In our imagination, it could happen, but in reality, it will never happen. This is why the material realm is called the dream of Īśvara. He creates a dream world in which everyone tries their luck to become the complete truth, the greatest virtue, and perfect bliss. For example, scientists create fictional theories to prove they are the greatest truth because everyone wants the greatest truth. Similarly, politicians try to become rulers to prove that they are the most virtuous because people elect virtuous leaders. Likewise, businessmen try to accumulate wealth to prove that they are the perfect bliss. And some renunciates try to renounce everything to prove that they are independent of the world. But their life is very short, their independence is very limited, their creations are very insignificant, their control is very minimal, and their pleasure is very trivial. And yet, everyone likes to enact this delusion of becoming the greatest truth, virtue, and bliss. And as long as they cannot give up these desires, they remain in the material realm. Yoga is the renunciation of the desire to become Īśvara and adoption of the desire to serve him. Meanwhile, religion is the renunciation of the desire to serve Īśvara and adoption of the desire to become him. And so the followers of yoga think of themselves as servants, while the followers of religion think of themselves as masters. Those who follow the yoga mindset want to serve the greatest number of people possible, and those who follow the religion mindset want to control the greatest number of people possible. The mentality of religion is that of a bhogi, which means a hedonist, who uses religion to increase his wealth and power while neither serving Ishvara nor the people. Of course, even a bhogi claims to be serving God, but he replaces truth with lies, virtue with vice, and bliss with suffering. He uses people like tools to satisfy his hedonism by making empty promises to them. The work of a bhogi creates more hedonists who fight with each other for greater control and pleasure. And so, yoga and religion are inversions of each other. Anyone who cannot see the difference between a yogi and a bhogi is factually either blind or a cheat. Once we see all these contrasts between Prakrti and matter, Jīva and soul, Kāla and time, Īśvara and God, Karma and faith, and yoga and religion, we can see why all these word equivalences are false. And yet, when the Sanskrit texts were translated into European languages, false dictionaries were created in which Prakrti became matter, Jīva became soul, Kāla became time, Īśvara became God, Karma became faith, and Yoga became religion. Words opposite in meaning were synonymized, and after that, nobody can truly understand anything from these European translations. Because while using European words, everyone assumes European meanings, which is factually false for the Vedic words. In fact, in many cases, the translations are worse than worthless because they invert the meanings, which is worse than ignorance. That doesn't mean we shouldn't or couldn't translate Vedic texts into European languages, but it means that when we translate, we must use convenience with caution and use all these translations like we use the word president to denote heads of state. The powers, roles, and duties of different presidents may be similar in some ways and opposite in other ways. For example, in some countries, the president makes all the executive decisions, while in other countries, the president makes no executive decision. However, a false translation equates all the meanings of the words, which is exactly like equating a rope to a snake based on the presence of some similarity between these two. With this background, I will now turn to explicitly refuting the modern Western monotheistic and selfish ideas of matter, soul, time, God, faith, and religion, one by one. I will not use Bhagavad-Gita citations to disprove these ideas, but simply ordinary examples, reasoning, and evidence, which could factually be given by someone who has never read Bhagavad-Gita. At the same time, the same arguments will prove why the Vedic substitutes of Prakṛti, Jīva, Kāla, Īśvara, Karma, and Yoga are true, supported by ordinary examples, reasoning, and evidence. This distinction between true and false is essential to stop reading and treating Bhagavad Gita as simply a Hindu scripture on par with other religious scriptures. One is provably true and the other is provably false. Now, that doesn't mean everything in all other scriptures is necessarily false. There may be some truths too. But that shared truth is just like a rope and a snake have many similarities between them. If we are swayed by that similarity, then our conclusion will be that the rope is a snake because we emphasize the similarities and neglected the differences, which is how illusions are created. The belief in the depersonalized, objectified, and quantified view of reality arose during European Enlightenment, and even before that in monotheistic religions and Western philosophy. It has been proven false over and over. The reason is that reality has form and we can never see the full form of anything from one perspective. For example, when we produce a mathematical formula for a square, the formula coincides with the experience only if the observer is above the square, looking at it from the middle of the square. A person standing in the same plane as the square doesn't see the square. A person looking at the square sideways doesn't see a square. Therefore, the formula for the square is confirmed by experience from only one perspective, namely, the observer has to be outside the plane of the square and look at the square from a location vertically above the center of the square. However, this is not the only way to look at the square. There are infinite other ways to look at the square, which include being on the same plane as the square and looking at the square from infinite places other than the center. None of these other ways will confirm the formula of the square. Therefore, the formula for the square is true from one perspective and false from infinite other perspectives. But depersonalized, objectified, and quantified view of reality disregards all perspectives except one. But that means it cannot explain the observations from infinite other perspectives because they contradict the formula of the square. So one might ask, what is the truth? Is there a square or not? And the answer is that the truth is how the square sees itself, provided the square could see itself. Of course, the square has no consciousness, so it can never see itself. But we can pretend to be the square, putting ourselves in the proverbial shoes of the square. For example, an observer looking at a square from a location on a perpendicular axis passing through the center of the square sees the square as a square. But everyone else who sees the square from a different perspective sees it differently. So some knowledge is first person and other knowledge is third person. The first person knowing is truth and the third person knowing is false. Until quite recently, people in India used to make square houses but left the center of the house empty as a courtyard. They would sit in the courtyard to feel the house and align their body and mind with the house by sitting in the center. Anyone can experience the calmness and confidence that enters a person by sitting in the center of these houses, because in the center they feel the house as if they were the house. When an instrument measures a property by moving a pointer on a dial, the situation is exactly like a driver pressing the brake pedal upon seeing a red light. The brake pedal movement is not the red light, and the driver may not even press the pedal always. And yet, an ethical driver, following the rules of the road, presses the brake pedal upon seeing the red light. So, quantities are actions like pressing the brake pedal, while qualities are causes of those actions, such as the red light. There is no hard and fast connection between quality and action. Rather, the connection is made through duty. And so the Vedic texts describe how nature behaves in an orderly manner because nature performs a moral duty. The order in nature is called dharma or duty in the Vedic text, which is just like a driver pressing the brake pedal upon seeing a red light. An ambulance may not stop at a red light, and that would still be duty. A speeding driver may not stop at the red light, and that would be a violation of duty. So, duty changes with time, place, situation, and person, and individuals may not follow the duty. Therefore, modern science is wrong about nature at many fundamental levels. First, modern science assumes that quantification gives us the nature of reality, although the reality in this example is the red light, and quantification is the action of pressing the brake pedal. Second, modern science assumes that red light exerts a force on the driver to make him press the brake pedal when he is actually doing a duty. Third, modern science assumes that all drivers will always press the brake pedal at all times, places, and situations, eliminating the driver's choice. This entire idea of measurement, force, and determinism is false. And the easiest evidence of that falsehood is that we cannot apply these ideas of measurement, force, and determinism to a driver pressing their brake pedal upon seeing a red light. That brings us to what we mean by Prakriti. Prakriti comprises guna and karma, or qualities and activities. The red light is qualities and the brake pedal press is activity. But they are not connected by a deterministic law. Rather, the senses of knowledge and action are connected through the mind. That means we see a red light, the input goes into the mind says, I have a duty to stop at the red light, and I choose to follow this duty, and then instructs the legs to press the brake pedal. And so, guna and karma, or quality and activity, are connected by duty. There is order on the streets if people follow the duty. If they don't, then there is chaos. So nature also seems ordered because devatas controlling the natural elements follow duty, exactly like we follow our duties. They just have different kinds of cars than ours, they see different lights, and they press different pedals. And we can apply the same idea to everything, and the Vedic texts do. This is why the heat of fire, the liquidity of water, the rising and setting of sun and moon, the coming and going of seasons are as much called dharma as a person doing their daily chores out of a sense of duty. Now we don't need many kinds of laws such as motion law, heat law, electromagnetic law, economic law, political law, tax law, state law, federal law, etc. We just need to ask, what is the duty? The fact is that depersonalization, quantification, mechanization, determinism, and universalism have never been true. We can prove that even the formula of a square cannot be confirmed from arbitrary perspectives. So, this entire ideology about nature created by Western philosophy, monotheistic religions, and modern science is easily falsifiable. And the alternative to that ideology is also easily understandable if we begin by understanding how humans create order and then extending it to nature. There is an alternative science based on quality, activity, and duty. And yet, the provably false ideology is taught to every student in every university in every country in the world today. The lie survives because of enormous propaganda and not because any of it is true. Nobody has ever seen linearly progressive time. The fact is that all of us go through cycles of day and night, health and sickness, comfort and struggle, birth and death. The study of history shows that civilizations and societies rise and fall. Every few years, the economy goes through boom and bust. Every few years, we see political parties come into power and go out of power, and then again return to power. Every year, we see the world passes through seasons such as summer and winter. Every organization goes through growth and decline. The idea of linear time, which brings with it the idea of continuous progress or continuous decline, is one of the most counterfactual ideas. And yet, it has been accepted as the default view of time today. This idea of time comes from monotheistic religions under which the world was created, and then God gave one revelation to some Messiah, after which that revelation was expected to globalize, and after its globalization, the Messiah would return to rule the world, and finally the world will come to an end. But if you look at history, this linear idea of history has never been true. For example, when Christianity was created, the world was about to end within the lifetimes of Christian preachers. The Roman Empire used this belief to outlaw all other religions and forcibly convert people to Christianity. But what happened after that? Well, the Roman Empire collapsed and Europe was plunged into the dark ages of poverty, disease, war, and death. Then there was a return to the past called Renaissance, followed by the resurrection of the idea of linear time, and Europeans went around the world inflicting colonization on it, hoping to convert everyone to Christianity. But what happened after that? Well, it resulted in two world wars in which millions of people were killed and colonial empires were overthrown. Again, there was a nostalgia about linear progress, and the West launched into hot and cold wars to globalize its ideology, religion, and worldview through economics and institutions. But what happened after that? Well, millions of people died, and the West itself became riddled with enormous debt. And today, every country on the planet is trying to find its original culture and roots and rejecting globalization. So, the idea of linear time, which means either linear progress or linear decline, has always been false in each person's life, in each society's rise and fall, and repeatedly demonstrated over history. That should mean monotheistic ideologies that profess the idea of linear time must also be false, based on empirical and rational proof. But monotheistic religions don't work on rational and empirical evidence. They keep trying to prove what has been repeatedly refuted in history, when a single counter evidence should disprove a false idea. This is the very nature of false dogma. It never accepts rational or empirical evidence. It never accepts that it was wrong at the first counter evidence. It keeps trying to prove the lie and brings enormous suffering on itself. The quest for truth begins with the rejection of falsehoods proven by empirical and rational evidence. Once we reject false ideas, then we can search for true ideas. And once we come to the perfect truth, there is continuous progress. If instead we stick to lies, then our lives, societies, civilizations, and the world goes through cycles. In the Vedic tradition, the entire universe goes through bigger and smaller cycles because of the relative predominance of greater truth or greater falsehoods. But if one comes to the perfect truth, he transcends the material realm and enters a realm of eternal progress. These bigger and smaller cycles are the result of problems created by false ideas. The more false idea creates more problems. Then we try to solve the problem with other false ideas, which leads to other problems, and eventually we come back to the original false idea. So cyclical time is the result of false ideas, and linear time is the result of true ideas. We can understand cyclical time only if we reject materialization of reality and accept that reality is meaning and purpose. False meanings and bad purposes create cyclical time, and true meanings and good purposes create linear progress. It means that if we create a moral society with good purposes and teach the truth, we will create long lasting and progressive societies. The reverse will happen if we keep forcing counterfactual ideas with bad intentions. We can prove this rationally and empirically, so we don't have to accept this on faith or just because scripture says it. Any idea of personhood constructed based on the body is meaningless because the body changes every moment of the day. If the self is a changing body, then the property I bought a few years ago can't be my property today because the body has already changed. If the self is a changing body, then my years old marriage must be null and void today because the bodies that married earlier have changed. If the self is a changing body, then the work I did over the years deserves no recognition today because the body has already changed. Today we have organ transplant techniques, so the person who replaced the organ must cease to be the same person and then lose ownership of his property, dissolve his marriage, and lose recognition of his past work. Since none of the above is factually acceptable to anyone, therefore no idea of personhood based on a body can ever be sustained in any society. To find persistent personhood, we must have an identity that transcends the body. This is not just a spiritual matter. It is a matter of the same person continuously owning property, keeping their marriage, and retaining recognition of their work. Factually, anyone who doesn't believe that there is a self beyond the body should renounce their association with property, spouse, and work to prove that they believe in what they proclaim. We know that nobody will do any such thing. They may proclaim that there is no self besides the body, but they will never do what such claims entail. So these are simply hypocritical claims. When such claims are mainstreamed in religion, philosophy, and science, then we know with 100% certainty that they are hypocrisies because none of them will ever practice what they preach. A transcendent self, different from the body, requires us to distinguish between I and I am X, where X is the body. The body always changes, so I am X becomes I am Y. But through these bodily changes, the I remains persistent. If the I was not persistent and the X changed into Y, then everyone will lose their property, dissolve their marriage, and lose ownership of their work. They are able to maintain a continuity in life because the I is persistent even as the body changes from X to Y. In short, the body can never be the I. The I has to be separate from the body and yet tied to one body at each moment of life. At each moment, we can say that the I is one body, but we can never say that this one body is the I. This requires non-binary and non-invertible logic, which means that Aristotle's first law of identity, which states that A, is false, because the first A is the soul and the second A is the body, and these two are not permanently identical. The soul body identity holds true only for a moment and changes every moment. So, what is true now will be false the next moment. Due to the successive changes in soul body attachment, even the law of non contradiction is falsified because I can make two contradictory claims, such as I am sleeping and I am awake, which are true of the same I at different times. Even the law of excluded middle is false because I could be daydreaming, so the claim that I must be either sleeping or awake is also false. In this way, nothing in Aristotelian logic holds true for the soul body attachment. Now, this is a very serious problem because, as we noted above, we need both soul and body to maintain continuity in life, and yet this continuity violates logic. So the answer to the problem is that I am not the body, but I have a body. Now, the body is not an object, but a property of the self. The I is the object, and the body is the property of that I. So, in science, religion, or philosophy, we cannot treat the body as an object. We can only treat the body as properties. These properties cannot exist without an object, which means whenever we see a body, there is some Atma behind it. We don't need to prove the existence of the Atma because anyone who questions its existence must renounce their property, dissolve their marriage, and lose recognition of earlier work. Since nobody will accept that, therefore everyone believes in the Atma. In fact, they need the Atma to exist, for otherwise the effort of every moment would become redundant the very next moment. So now the question is, what is Atma? What do we mean by self or I? The answer is that I comprises three parts: a knower, a known, and a knowing. These three aspects are merged in self awareness, so we can call them one. However, the knower, known, and knowing separate when we know something other than the self, so they are not identical. For example, each of us can imagine that we are a king at one moment and a beggar at the next moment. The knower is the same, but the known of king and beggar are different. So the knower and known are not the same. Similarly, we may have a very hard time imagining that we are a tree or a fish, which means that our knowing works in some cases but not in other cases. So it cannot be identical to either the knower or the known. And thus, the knower, known, and knowing are one in one sense and different in another sense. This is why we can never fit the self or I in binary logic. Easy examples of the violation of binary logic for the self arise in statements such as I am a liar. The fact is that if I am a liar, then my statement must be false, so I must be truthful. But if I am truthful and I said that I am a liar, then I must be a liar. And so I am both a liar and truthful, which is impossible in binary logic. That is because in binary logic, one thing cannot be three things. But in case of the self, one thing is three things. For example, the knower can be truthful, the known can be liar, and the statement that I am a liar can be the knowing. I am neither fully a liar nor fully truthful because part of me is a liar, part of me is truthful, and part of me is knowing that the truthful is a liar. Similarly, if I say I am dead, then factually, I should have never made such a statement. But if I have made the statement, then I must not be dead. So if the sentence exists, then it is false. But if the sentence doesn't exist, then it is true. How can something that doesn't exist be true? The answer is that infinite such problems are created by binary logic. As we just saw, they arise even in case of soul-body identity. When we say I am awake and I am sleeping, because under binary logic, we must conclude that waking equals sleeping. So the conclusion is that we have to throw away binary logic because it doesn't apply to the self or the I. But as we have discussed, the self or the I is the foundation for everything. So if binary logic doesn't apply to the foundation, then how can it apply to the superstructure? Because in every superstructure, there is a foundation. And so the simple implication of soul-body separation is that we have to reject binary logic. Western science, philosophy, and religion all rest on binary logic, but nobody actually practices soul-body identity. So this hypocrisy of identity is simply a theory without practice. When we use binary logic to create science, philosophy, and religion, we will produce infinite contradictions with reality, which means our theories will say one thing, but our practices will be another. And due to this theory-practice mismatch, all the theories will be false, and yet everyone will claim to be an intellectual. This fake intellectualism arises due to equating soul and body in theory, but never putting it in practice. It arises due to acceptance of binary logic in theory, while its rejection in practice. All intellectual arguments use binary logic, but nobody follows those arguments in practice. But if we reject the soul-body identity, then the journey to the truth begins. An easy illustration of non-binary logic is whole and part thinking. Let's take the example of knowledge and its various parts such as maths, physics, chemistry, biology, economics, and so on. We can say that economics is knowledge, but we can't say that knowledge is economics. Similarly, biology is knowledge, but knowledge is not biology. In whole part relationships, x is y is not invertible as y is x. Srila Prabhupada used to illustrate this whole part non-binary logic relationship by saying that God is everything, but everything is not God. God is everything means that all things were originally present in God and expanded out of God. But even after expansion, they are still present inside God, although they are also present outside God. In binary logic, something can be either inside or outside. But in case of God and His creation, the creation is both inside and outside God. Thus, Ishopanishad says, Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. It means this is complete and that is complete. From the complete came the complete. After removing the complete from the complete, the balance is complete. Now, this is impossible to understand if we apply binary logic or even ordinary arithmetic, because 1 minus 1 must be equal to 0 and not 1. Similarly, 1 plus 1 must be equal to 2 and not 1. So, if we want to understand the Īśvara, we cannot use binary logic. And the basic reason is that binary logic is about physical things, while non-binary logic is about ideas. If I know about a table and I tell you about the table, then by telling you, my knowledge of the table is not lost. Similarly, if you already knew about the table, by me telling you about the table, you gain nothing. So 1 minus 1 for me still equals 1, not 0, while 1 plus 1 for you still equals 1 and not 2. And thus binary logic applies to physical thinking and non-binary logic applies to idea-based thinking. We can also illustrate the problems with binary logic in case of Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta tried to use binary logic through a clear separation between truth and illusion as Brahman and Maya. That means the world does not exist in Brahman because the world is Maya. And if Maya existed inside Brahman, then Brahman could never be free of Maya. But this separation of Brahman and Maya begs the question of why the Brahman falls into Maya. Does the Maya force Brahman to fall? In that case, the Brahman could not liberate itself because the cause of fall was Maya. So only Maya must negate Maya, which is impossible. Alternatively, does Brahman itself fall into Maya, in which case it could not be totally pure. The only way Brahman could remove Maya was by negating itself, which is impossible. Thus, the application of binary logic made Advaita Vedanta incomprehensible, because in all cases, either Brahman or Maya was self-negating, which is impossible. After Advaita, many successive interpretations were done which tried to deal with these problems. But none of these interpretations factually rejected binary logic or even a physical conception of reality. All these interpretations culminated during the time of Sri Chaitanya in what is called Achintya Bheda Bhed, which means inconceivable oneness and difference. As we have discussed, even the self is knower, known, and knowing, and these three are both one and different. So oneness and difference is true. But why is this inconceivable? The answer is binary logic and physical thinking. If we think in terms of a dreamer and dream, then the dream is both inside the dreamer and outside the dreamer, one with the dreamer and separate from the dreamer. So the shift from physical to conceptual thinking, along with the shift from binary to non-binary logic, is essential to make everything conceivable. I call this Chintya Bheda Bhed, or conceivable simultaneous oneness and difference. But this is not just my invention, because the Ishopanishad already says that after removing the complete from the complete, the balance is complete. The shift is in our way of thinking about the Vedic texts, not in the Vedic texts. And the shift is necessary because without it we can never understand the description of whole and part, and Bheda Bhed remains achintya. But this shift makes everything understandable. Now Īśvara is the complete meaning, and the world he manifests from himself is infinite partial meanings. But even after manifesting all these partial meanings, the Īśvara doesn't become meaningless. Rather, Īśvara becomes the purpose of all the partial meanings. This purpose is embedded in the meaning when the meaning is expanded from Īśvara. So the expansion is simultaneously meaning and purpose, but the expanded meaning is partial meaning and the expanded purpose is complete. This is the basis of the distinction between Bhagavan, Paramatma and Brahman. Bhagavan or Īśvara is complete meaning, Brahman is infinite partial meanings, but within each partial meaning is the complete purpose called Paramatma. So if the partial meaning becomes individualistic, then it forgets its true purpose and slowly even misunderstands itself. And that misconception is the body, while the true conception is the Atma. However, we cannot simply understand the Atma perfectly without the Paramatma, because truly understanding the self means knowing the purpose of the self, which is the Paramatma. Once we understand this whole part theory based on non-binary logic, then we know that theology is the whole meaning and whole purpose, and every other subject mastered by one person is partial meaning, but its purpose is still the whole. It means that we can use every subject to know Īśvara, and if we do that, then that subject is perfectly known. But if we separate theology from all other subjects, such as what modern academia does, then we only get misconceptions of that subject, which means infinite false theories are produced which keep changing, just like the Atma keeps changing its body. For example, economists keep propounding numerous theories, and yet all these theories are called economics. So economics is the Atma and the theories are the changing bodies. If we want to know true economics, then we have to know Lakshmi, who serves Vishnu. And then by knowing Lakshmi, economic theory will never change. So soul and body would become identical. Because now we have shifted from selfish theories of economics that serve us to an unselfish theory of economics that serves Vishnu. Likewise, if we understand Durga, then politics will never change because Durga serves Vishnu, and we would have shifted from selfish politics to unselfish politics. Thus, every subject, when it serves Vishnu, will become eternal truth if it is connected to Vishnu. And all these varied subjects will be different kinds of partial meanings, and yet, due to a common purpose for all subjects, they will be mutually reconciled. Once we understand the difference between whole meaning, whole purpose, and partial meaning and purpose, then we can understand why the Atma cycles through good or bad lives in this world. The answer is individualism. Initially, the Atma forgets the whole purpose, which is the Paramatma present within each Atma, which most people call conscience or inner voice in us. If we remember the whole purpose, then that conscience or inner voice always guides us toward the right meaning of life to fulfill the complete purpose. But if we forget the Paramatma, then the inner voice or conscience stops guiding us. And then we start inventing our meaning and purpose. That invention of meaning and purpose is our body. It always changes, and that change is called karma. It is divided into good, bad, and neutral, such that good karma fulfills an invented purpose, bad karma hinders the invented purpose, and neutral karma takes us to the complete purpose. And thus, as we have discussed, karma is epistemology. But it is not epistemology about the world. It is rather epistemology about who we are. It is about taking us from invented meaning and purpose to true meaning and purpose. However, when we are situated in our true nature, then we also see the world in its true nature. So self-epistemology is also world epistemology. If we have a misconception about who we are, then we always have a misconception about what the world is. Thereby, one who becomes a servant of Īśvara becomes a perfect scientist because he is situated in his true nature, so he also sees the true nature of the world. And so, in the Vedic tradition, the focus is not on knowing the world but on knowing ourselves. This focus is not on fixing the world problems but on fixing our problems. That is because once we fix our problems, then we see what the world problem actually is, and then we can fix it. Otherwise, if we try to fix the world without fixing ourselves, then we don't even understand the actual world problem. And depending on how many problems we have in us, we create those many problems in the world. All these self problems are called human defects, and they are divided into four parts, namely misperception, hallucination, misinterpretation, and a cheating propensity. Due to these four problems, there can be no epistemology for the world unless we find an epistemology for diagnosing and fixing our own problems. Since karma fixes our problems, therefore, after it fixes us, we become free of these four defects, and then we know the world perfectly. So, in the Vedic tradition, only the ideal persons who have fixed their problems can become gurus. The mark of that guru is that he has no other purpose than to serve Īśvara. Such a guru is always guided by the Paramatma in the heart, and he sees the world's problems for what they actually are. Anyone else who tries to become a guru with any purpose other than to serve Īśvara is deluded. His purpose is wrong, so his meanings are wrong, and what he teaches to others is also wrong. This is how the Vedic tradition is completely different from other blind faith religions, in which a person is not purified, but he becomes a priest, pastor, preacher, etc. And instead of serving Īśvara, he either serves himself or a bureaucratic hierarchy of selfish individuals serving themselves. In these blind faith religions, a person goes through a small ritual called conversion, and immediately after that, he starts converting others. He never undergoes an inner transformation of fixing his four defects. In fact, these religions teach that the inner defects can never be fixed because each person is eternally sinful and the sins are never removed, but they are only forgiven. Once this sinfulness is rationalized through religion, these converts kill the inner voice or conscience, silencing the Paramatma, after which they do the most heinous activities in the name of religion and God. And yet, they think that all their sins will be forgiven because of their blind faith in some ideology. All such flawed individuals also become philosophers and scientists and enter academia and start propounding fictions and teaching them to students, who themselves lap up these lies as gospel truth. The education of these philosophers or scientists never involves inner transformation, character development, fixing their own defects, or even recognizing that they are highly defective. Their theories are not psychoanalyzed back to their myriad personal defects. Instead, students are asked to respect these defective individuals and their speculations. And these defective individuals misperceive the world problems, try to fix the world problems, and simply bring the world to their level of defectiveness. This is because in all blind faith religions, the defectiveness of the individual is normalized and rationalized. It is assumed that everyone is defective, so nobody can know the truth, and we just bumble through trial and error. That error part of the trial and error is karma. These errors cause immense misery. And if one doesn't go to an error-free guru, then he keeps doing his trial and error. In fact, after some time, people even forget about the previous trials and how they led to errors. And they keep doing the same trials, repeating the same errors, which is called the cycle of birth and death. But it is actually a cycle of repeated mistakes due to the forgetfulness of past errors. Now, some people say that we don't remember our past lives, so how can we accept karma and rebirth? The answer is that you were born with different abilities, proclivities, and opportunities, and there is no way to explain that without a previous birth. Someone is born a musician and someone is born a sportsman. Someone loves doing art and someone loves reading. Someone is born rich and someone is born poor. So each person has two choices. One, they can say that all this is random and then they can keep doing trial and error. Two, they can accept that there is order in the world and then learn what that order is through Bhagavad-Gita. And then they can fix their lives right now and permanently. Generally, those who are prepared to fix their inner defects accept the second option, and those who are unprepared for inner change accept the first option. So, karma doesn't preclude choice. Karma is not a fixed destiny. But to realize that it is not a fixed destiny, we have to be prepared for fixing our inner flaws. Ultimately, that fixing means understanding that the eternal purpose is Īśvara. Once that purpose is fixed, then slowly all the misconceptions about the self are destroyed. So everything begins by understanding Īśvara, Jīva, Prakṛti, Kāla, and Karma, and then accepting the gradual process of inner change. This process of inner change is yoga. The most fundamental aspect of that inner change is renouncing individualism, because all the problems began with individualism. As we have discussed, there are many kinds of individualism, such as thinking that we are separate from other living entities and Īśvara, or thinking that we are just the body meant to enjoy as much as possible, or thinking that life is meant for my liberation and I can neglect my duties and debts while I seek liberation, or simply grinding through life doing whatever facilitates survival. So, renouncing this individualism and understanding that we are an eternal part of Īśvara is yoga. As we renounce individualism, all the inner defects are gradually destroyed. The worst kind of individualism is thinking that we have a privileged and special relationship with God, which entitles us to dominate and exploit others. Under this delusion of privilege, a person does the worst kind of atrocities, emboldened by his belief that he is protected by his special relationship to God. So, no rules, regulations, morals, or norms apply to him. In fact, he considers himself empowered by God to apply all kinds of rules, regulations, morals, and norms onto others. Such deluded people suffer the most from double standards, hypocrisy, and immorality. But they never see it as anything untoward because they truly believe that their special and privileged relationship with God immunizes them against the consequences of their insane activities. Basically, God becomes their bulletproof vest, expected to protect them from any bullets coming their way, after which they become emboldened to fearlessly shoot everyone else. The creators of such ideologies manufacture their exclusivity through racial, gender, national, ethnic, cultural, ideological, geographical, historical, and many other kinds of identities. These are ever changing bodily traits, and yet they become the basis of an eternal but exclusive, privileged, and special relationship with God. As we have seen, their ideas of matter, soul, God, time, faith, and religion are inversions of Prakṛti, Jīva, Īśvara, Kāla, Karma, and Yoga. They reject rational and empirical evidence and focus on fictional storytelling, propaganda, and narrative building. At the heart of these religions lies a privileged, exclusive, and special contract with God, under which the believers proclaim faith in the most irrational, counterfactual, and outrageous claims, which supposedly guarantees an eternal life in heaven. This insane, immoral, and malignant ideology requires a clear separation between religion and science, which becomes the cornerstone of their belief system. Now, the problem is as follows. If God is so insane as to say things that counter facts and proofs seen through his creation, then he cannot be rational. If God is so immoral as to sanction all kinds of atrocities, then he cannot be virtuous. If God is so malignant as to hate people based on race, gender, geography, ethnicity, and nationality, which he himself assigned to the soul at the time of birth, then he cannot be loving or blissful. But because the innate nature of Atma is virtue, truth, and happiness, it can never truly accept an irrational, immoral, and malignant God. One has to counter one's own nature to become irrational, immoral, and malignant to accept such a deity. The rejection of the self to embrace a religious ideology creates enormous inner turmoil, torment, and suffering, because it is the attempt to abandon the self in order to fulfill the true nature of the self. It is effectively saying that by killing the self, I will enter eternal life. Unfortunately, at present, most people are lost in the individualistic conception of the self, matter, and God, which also negates Kāla, Karma, and Yoga. Due to the rampant proselytization, propagation, and propaganda about the virtues of individualism, people have forgotten how reality is one whole with infinite parts. Individualism denies the whole, atomizes the parts, sends those parts into war with each other, which culminates in destruction and death. If we want to end this war, destruction, and death, we have to reject individualism and embrace the one whole with infinite parts understanding. This is the simple message of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is the whole and we are the parts. He says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 verse 7, Mama Ivansa Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, which means all the living entities and their places of living are my eternal parts. Then he says in the same verse, Manasasthani Indriyani Prakrti Sthani Karshati, which means right now all these eternal parts of me are struggling very hard in this world using their senses and the mind. So in one verse, Krishna sums up the entire spiritual and material condition by saying that all these living entities are my eternal parts, but right now they are fighting with each other. The question is, why are they fighting? And the answer is that they forgot that they are Krishna's parts and became individualistic. So this individualism is the root cause and predominant condition of the material world. And its renunciation to realize one's parthood is the spiritual condition. This is such a simple, easy, and profound message that everyone can understand, practice, and teach. Whole and part. That's it. This is the sum and substance of Bhagavad Gita. So why should whole and part be called a Hindu scripture to separate it from dozens of other types of scriptures? Why should it be called faith, belief, and religion when it is rationally provable, empirically verifiable, and practically implementable science? On the other hand, individualism needs infinite scriptures, faiths, beliefs, and religions because its goal is to separate rather than unite. There are infinite ways to separate and only one way to unite. The simple message of Bhagavad Gita is called unity in diversity. Krishna is the unity and his parts are the diversity. So Bhagavad Gita is not scripture, religion, belief, faith, or ideology. Bhagavad Gita is truth and science. And everything else that people call science or truth is an illusion because at the root of their worldview lies individualism. Physics says the world is separate particles. Chemistry says there are separate molecules. Biology says there are separate cells. Medicine says there are separate organs. Cosmology says there are separate bodies in space. Economics says there are separate owners. Politics says there are separate countries. Psychology says there are separate minds. And mathematics says every number is a separate point. And all these separate particles, molecules, cells, organs, bodies, owners, countries, minds, and numbers are simply exerting forces, contracts, and laws on each other, which Krishna calls Manasasthani Indriyani Prakṛti Karshati. Karshati means pulling and pushing, forcing and being forced, becoming predator and prey. That is because there is no whole. The intellectual destruction of the whole came out of Protestant theology, which elevated individualism to the highest principle of reality. Individualism then became the cornerstone of European Enlightenment, as the world was separated from God in deism. Each soul became an independent, free individual, and God continued to be separate from the soul under monotheism. Thus, European Enlightenment championed reductionism and individualism like never before, and this became the foundation of modern science. This reductionism and individualism is actually atheism from the Vedic perspective, because the Supreme Īśvara is the whole truth, And if we deny the whole, we are actually denying the existence of the supreme Īśvara. So anyone who thinks that Protestant theology actually led to enlightenment or science or truth or progress is a complete idiot. Personally, I find it shocking that many such idiots move around equating the Vedic tradition to Christianity because they have no understanding of the Vedic tradition or even how much damage has been caused by enlightenment and Protestant reductionism and individualism. When people talk about science today, they are actually talking about the atomization of nature, cosmos, society, family, and the body under Protestant theology. Science is not independent of theology. In fact, modern science came out of Protestant theology. But the Vedic tradition rejects the individualism and reductionism of this theology because there can be no life, no happiness, no truth, and no virtue under this individualism and reductionism. Individualism is the actual cause of all the problems in the world today, as monotheism separated God from the soul, which then separated each soul from each other, and gradually that separatist, reductionist, and individualist ideology caused havoc all over the world through the destruction of all cultures, civilizations, traditions, philosophies, sciences, and religions that saw reality as one integrated whole and wanted to live in harmony with nature and with other societies. Sociologists such as Max Weber, in fact, went so far as to say that Protestant theology is the underlying philosophy of capitalism, and no other society can progress until it denounces and renounces their collectivism. Weber, in fact, stated that Hindus and Buddhists will never progress in life because of their tolerant, collectivist, and compassionate attitudes. After destroying all holistic traditions, including much of the Vedic education system that prevailed before the colonial rule, the West as a whole went about denigrating compassionate civilizations as primitive, barbaric, godless heathens and uncivilized. And they considered their replacement with the reductionist, individualist, and separatist ideologies of European Enlightenment as the path to their modernization and civilization. Therefore, there can be no truck between modern science and Vedic thinking. We can empirically and rationally prove that every idea espoused by European Enlightenment is irrational, immoral, and malignant. Its rejection of the whole is actually the rejection of Krishna as the supreme complete truth. To understand and teach Bhagavad-Gita, we have to begin by rejecting the entire monotheistic trajectory of separation, reduction, and individualism as fundamentally carcinogenic to the soul, which will never lead to truth, virtue, or happiness. So it can never ever be spirituality. After we reject the false, immoral, and malicious ideologies coming out of monotheism, we can talk about the science of Bhagavad Gita, which is as simple as saying one whole and infinite parts. This is not monotheism, polytheism, pantheism, monism, panentheism, nothingness, nihilism, or atheism, into which the modern academic discourse tries to classify everything, because they are all rooted in physicalist thinking. The Vedic thinking is persons, qualities, meanings, and purposes. Since we reject physicalist thinking, therefore we don't fit into any Western category. And so, this is the radical, rational, empirical, practical, and universal message of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is complete meaning and purpose, and everything else is partial meaning and purpose. When the partial meaning and purpose become a servant of the complete meaning and purpose, then everything is perfect. All the problems begin with the part trying to detach, attack, abuse, or disregard the whole under the delusion of individualism. And that problematic ideology is material suffering. Then the intellectual rationalization of individualism is the worst kind of science, philosophy, and religion. and the intellectual justification of holism is the best kind of science, philosophy, and religion. Simply by one move, we can transition from the worst to the best. The rejection of individualism is yoga, which means unite, connect, and integrate the parts with the whole. May this blissful truth of connectedness annihilate the malignant lie of individualism.